In Spanish, there are two moods. The first mood that you learn about is the indicative. And you can think of the indicative as everything you've learned so far in Spanish. For example, the present tense, the preterite, the imperfect, etc. The indicative is indicative. It indicates what's happening, what's happened, something that's concrete. In Spanish, we have a second mood to kind of talk about things that aren't necessarily certain, and we call that mood the subjunctive. Sentences in the subjunctive in Spanish have two parts. The first part is called the main clause. The second part of the sentence is called the subordinate clause. These clauses are connected by the word que. So the first part of a sentence that includes the subjunctive is the main clause, so we'll cover that first. The main clause uses the indicative form of the verb. And like I mentioned earlier, that means that you can use the present tense or the past tense, whatever it is that you need to use in order to indicate what a person wants, suggests, or demands. The main clause can also be an impersonal statement. And if you remember from Spanish 2, at the end of Spanish 2, you talk about impersonal statements with the use of the impersonal se. The second part of the sentence, the subordinate clause, uses the subjunctive form of the verb. And we're going to talk about subjunctive, how to form a subjunctive in a moment. The subjunctive is conjugated for the person you are talking to or about. Now let's talk about forming the subjunctive. And as you look at these three steps, you're probably going to think to yourself, this looks really familiar. So let's talk about it. The first step in forming the subjunctive is you put the verb in the yo form. The second step is to drop the, yep, you guessed it, o. And now all you need to do is you need to add the opposite ending. Forming the subjunctive is exactly like forming -2 commands, usted and ustedes commands. If we want to put bailar in the subjunctive, it's really easy. All you do is follow the steps. So step 1 is put the verb in the yo form. Next thing you do is you drop the o. And next, you add the opposite ending. In case you forgot, here's a bit of a cheat sheet. Opposite endings for AR verbs are es, hemos, eis, and en. We're not going to use o because o isn't really the opposite of o from AR to ER, IR verbs. So the opposite ending for bailar kind of depends on what we're conjugating for. So if we wanted to say yo sugiero que tú, and we want to use the to form of bailar in the subjunctive, we would get bailes. If we want to form the subjunctive for the verb salir, it's an IR verb. So we do the same thing we do for -2, usted, and ustedes commands. We put the verb in the yo form, salgo. We drop the o, and we add the opposite ending. So we have another cheat sheet for that. So if you look at these ER, IR verbs and we want the opposite ending, we have a, as, a, amos, ais, and an. Again, we're not going to use o as an opposite for o because that doesn't really make sense. So if we want to say es importante que salgas de la escuela a las 3 de la tarde. It's important for you to get out of school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We would just add the opposite ending again for the to form. Just like it was important to remember car-gar zar verbs for the preterite yo form, and again, it was important to remember car-gar zar verbs for negative to usted and ustedes commands. It's going to be important to remember car-gar zar verbs in the subjunctive as well. So any verb that ends in car, we're going to start the subjunctive off by going to QUE. Any verb that ends in GAR, we're going to start the ending with GUE. And for any verb that ends in ZAR, again, we're going to go to CE. No accents here. Look at a verb like buscar, and we see that it ends in CAR. And we know that the endings for AR verbs are the opposite endings, ES, hemos, eis, en. We know that the CAR must go to QUE. All that means is that the yo form would be busque. The to form would be busques. Ella usted, busque. Nosotros, busquemos. Vosotros, busquéis. And ellos, ellas, ustedes, busquen.